So you're playing Genshin, you're doing some 10 pulls, and you get honorary 5-star Xiangling. Now what do you get with Xiangling besides somebody that has a pet that is a cooking god? Well, Xiangling is a polearm wielding pyro user who is one of the strongest characters in the game. And in this video, we are going to look at the basics of Xiangling. Now, if you've been playing Genshin for any kind of time, then you know that you should already have Xiangling, right? You get her for free upon clearing a certain floor in the Abyss. So if you've gotten her on this banner, that means that you're going to have constellations. So we will be looking at her constellations later on in this video. But first, let's start with her kit. Her normal attacks are going to be kind of normal. Now you are going to see that after I do all of the normal attacks, that's going to apply pyro to the enemy. That is from one of her constellations. We'll look at that later. But her normal attacks do physical damage, and then her charge attack is going to be the corkscrew variant. Now we're going to look at her skill. Her skill is going to drop Guoba. Guoba is going to auto target the nearest enemy, or the one that you're attacking, doing intermittent pyro damage. That's kind of it. Now you will notice that the enemy hit by Guoba's fire in here is going to have those downward arrows, meaning that they're being debuffed in some way. That is again from one of her constellations, which we will look at later. Now if we look at her first passive, it is going to increase the length of fire, the range of fire that Guoba shoots out. And her other passive is whenever Guoba is finished shooting out pyro at the enemy, it is going to drop this chili pepper, and whoever picks up the chili pepper is going to get an attack buff. All in all, that's kind of it for Guoba. He does produce some energy for Xiangling. You can swap Xiangling off the field and Guoba stays on the field, which is also really, really good. But that's kind of it. He shoots fire, he gives energy, and then with constellations, he makes the enemy weaker to pyro. That's it. Now her burst is where you really get into where Xiangling is considered one of the best characters, or one of the strongest characters in the game. If we use her burst, it is going to spin her polearm around her, creating this pyronado. And if you swap to another character, it will stay on the field, spinning around, hitting the enemy, and dealing pyro damage. Now, why is this so good? Essentially, it's because this burst has no what is called internal cooldown, or ICD for short. Now, what ICD does is it is basically an internal clock that we do not see that determines how often you can apply an element to an enemy, getting reactions in the process. It is either 2.5 seconds or every 3 hits. It has to be 3 hits of the same thing. So like 3 normal attack hits, it doesn't necessarily count for normal attack skill burst. Each of those have their own ICDs, their own internal cooldowns. So you could do 1 normal attack, 1 skill, 1 burst. And as long as the elements, as long as another element's on the enemy, it will cause a reaction. What's so special about Xiangling is that her burst has no internal cooldown. Every time it hits an enemy, it will apply the element. Doesn't matter how many times it's hit, doesn't matter how long it's been, it will always apply pyro to the enemy, causing a reaction. And there are very few characters in the game that can keep up with this. In this team that we are using, Tartaglia's normal attacks after using his skill in gaining Hydro conversion can in fact keep up with Xiangling's pyro applications as much as you can, because his normal attacks are so fast that he's able to do that 3 hit consistently and reliably, allowing Xiangling to cause vaporize reactions. It's the whole reason why Tartaglia national team works so well. Something else with her burst is that it does snapshot. I know I'm throwing around a lot more terms than I normally do in these videos, but what snapshot does, any buffs going to Xiangling whenever she uses her burst will remain for the entire burst. So if we put down Bennett's burst and then let Xiangling pick up the chili pepper, and then use her burst, the attack buff from Benny and the attack buff from the chili pepper are going to remain for the entirety of Xiangling's burst, even if you swap her off the field, even if Bennett's burst ends early. No matter what, the remainder of this time that this pyronado is spinning around will have those attack buffs, which is really, really good. She can also snapshot elemental buffs from like Sucrose or something like that. It's a phenomenal, because it can snapshot and has no internal cooldown. And that's kind of it with her kit. It is simple, but it's very, very effective. Even though she came out very early into the game, because she has no ICD on her burst, and because her burst snapshots, she has remained a very, very strong character in Genshin. So now we're going to talk about artifacts and weapons. Now for artifacts, her best set is going to be Emblem of Severed Fates. It's going to increase energy recharge, and it's going to give a damage buff based on how much energy recharge you have. So this is a phenomenal artifact set for Xiangling. because most of her damage comes from her burst. Now, your sands can kind of depend on what weapon you have. You want around 220 energy recharge if you're using the catch. So if you can use an attack sands and still have 220 ER with the catch, then that is the way to go. If you're running like Raiden's weapon, Engulfing, then you're going to be running an ER sands no matter what. Then, of course, you're going to be running a Pyro Goblet, and then most likely a crit rate because you don't really have crit coming from anywhere else, right? She doesn't get crit from anywhere else in her kit, unless your substats on artifacts have just been phenomenal. Then you can use a crit damage circlet. Now, for weapons, like we said, you do, of course, have the catch. It is her best free-to-play option. Just go do the fishing. Please, the catch is so good on a lot of different people. It is very, very good. But an even better weapon for her would be Engulfing Lightning, which is Raiden's signature. Zucchini, I believe, calls Engulfing Raiden Xiangling signature whenever we talk about it. So Engulfing Lightning is also a very, very good option. If you do not have either of these, for some reason you refuse to fish for the catch, you do have some other options. You do have Deathmatch, which is going to be a battle pass weapon. It gets up crit rate, and then it's also going to increase her attack. You do have Dragon's Bane, which is going to increase her elemental mastery, which is going to be good for her like vape reactions. It's also going to increase damage against enemies affected by Pyro and Hydro, and in a vape team, Xiangling is always going to have that going on, so that's really good. You do have Fav, but at this point, stop using Fav, go get the catch. And then you have Ballad of the Fjord, which is going to increase her crit rate, and her EM is as long as you have at least 3 elements in your party. So this is another really good option for her as well. Now, because you do get Xiangling for free upon clearing a certain floor in the Abyss, we are going to look at constellations, because if you got her on this banner, then you at least have C1. So her C1, opponents hit by Guoba's attack have their pyro resistance reduced by 15. C2 is where we get that extra little pyro damage during her normal attacks. C3 is going to be normal, it's going to increase the level of her burst. C4 is going to increase the duration of her burst by 40%, which is really, really good. C5 has to be one of the best named constellations, being Guoba Mad. It's going to increase Guoba's level by 3. Now for C6, it's going to increase all party members' pyro damage bonus by 15% during the duration of her burst. So this is another really good option, not only for herself, but if you're running her in like a mono pyro team, this can also be really, really good because you're going to make the enemies weaker with Guoba, and then you're going to give your own team a pyro damage bonus. So it's a pretty decent constellation, albeit a little bit more niche than the others. Now, I don't necessarily use Xiangling a lot. I am going to be using her more, either in this Tartaglia national team, which I want to build out a little bit better, or for whenever I get a Yato. I could use her with Mualani, but I don't really use Mualani. But she is a phenomenal option to use with Mualani. There's a lot of teams that Xiangling can go into where she's going to be very, very good, very, very useful because of that no internal cooldown and snapshot ability. Now, I do know that my Xiangling was only level 70, and yes, I had to take some of Raiden's artifacts off of Raiden for this video because I don't particularly use Xiangling. I'm going to use Xiangling. I promise I'm going to use Xiangling. But just because I don't use her doesn't mean that you shouldn't use her. So if you've kind of been holding onto Xiangling, then build her out and see how you like her. That is going to be it for this video. Cookie has green hair. I have green hair right now in this PNG tuber model, and I will see you in the next one.
水の矢